listening to Cooper Talk.
Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guests. I gotta tell you something, people. My guest today, I'm excited because my guest is a powerfully funny comic. She's a coach, she's an advocate, she's a writer, she's an actor, she's a podcaster. She does it all. And I found out her birthday is November 15th, which is my sister's birthday. And it makes both of us Scorpios because I'm October 30th. And my guest is Judy Gold. How you doing, Judy?
Good, how are you?
Good, good. So now, are you in New York right now?
No, I'm in Provincetown, Massachusetts.
Okay, now you have a show that goes weekly, I believe?
Yeah, so I have a house in Provincetown. I bought it in 1994. I was on a series, and I took the money and bought a house, which was the smartest thing I ever did in my entire life. And I started performing here in 92 at the Post Office Cabaret, and I come here every summer for a certain amount of time to perform. So for the last several years, I sort of have a residency here at the Art House, and I perform 2 nights a week. I do hour-plus shows, and I work on new material, and the audiences are fucking great. Am I allowed to curse on this?
Yeah, curse all you want.
Fucking fuck great. So I'm working July, Fridays, and Saturdays, and in August, Tuesday night and Wednesday night.
Now, you've been doing it for a few years at this place, so I'm sure people come back and see you. Is it hard for you to sit there as a comic and constantly write new material? Because people know, if they know your act and they know you, they're going to want to see something new.
You know, that's a good question. The thing is, I mean, it's, you know, we always compare it to music. It's like, you know, you go hear a concert, and I wrote about this in my book, that with comedians, it's true. A lot of people are like, I heard that joke, you did that joke on The Tonight Show like 2 weeks ago. You know, they don't realize how long it takes to write a bit, you know? And if you go to see a music show, you want to go see your favorite band, right? And they do all new stuff. You're like, what the fuck? I don't want to hear this shit. I want to hear the old stuff. So for people who truly love stand-up, there are bits that you can hear over and over again. You know, especially as a comedian, I love hearing, you know, a lot of my favorite comics. I'll say, do this bit, you know, because I just love it so much. And I think because you're right, because people, I'm like, oh my God, these people saw me last year. I got to have new stuff. I think that lights a fire under my ass. Plus I get bored with shit. I'm like, I'm done with this. I'm done. But I do often have people coming up to me and telling me old bits or saying something to me, and I'm like, oh my God, wait, where do I know that from? And it's a punchline from one of my bits. So it really depends on the consumer, you know, the person, and how into comedy they are. Because look, you and I, we're the same generation. We listen to albums over and over and over. I mean, I listened to Joan Rivers' album, I don't know how many times, like till I could lip sync it perfectly, you know? So it really, it's such an interesting art form in that way. But personally, you know, I get bored with my stuff. I'm like, I don't feel like doing that. And life changes and things change. And, you know, you want to address what's on people's minds, which is so weird because that's, you know, you think about the pandemic, all the clubs were closed, which is so unfortunate because it was like the perfect storm. We were all in the same boat, you know, and it was like a gift, but, you know.
Well, it's funny you said that.
For comedy, not for life.
I did comedy from 88 to 95. And I was out of the Philly area, and I go on the road, and I would become friends with Facebook and years later, and people would like send me like a message of, you remember this bit? And it was mine. And I'm like, how the fuck did I forget that when someone who I knew I haven't seen in 20 years remembers it.
Right.
And I think for me, I agree with you because, like, you know, my older brother had Cheech and Chong wedding album. I mean, and I listened to that constantly in the early Steve Martin albums where it was the Let's Get Small.
Oh my God, yes.
And even with your act, like I was watching a clip of you today with the Spit Girl and Judy Show.
Please.
I gotta ask you, that was a ballsy move. Like, what made you think of, okay, I'm gonna go up on stage with this Spit Girl and people are gonna sit there and laugh at it?
Well, that's such a funny question. So I always took acting classes because I always wanted to be prepared, you know. I wanted to be able to be a comic who knew how to act. And so I was doing I must have been like 23. I don't know. I was doing some scene in my acting class from the 20s, and I put a little Spit Girl here. And I kind of liked it. And I was like, oh. And I feel like, I mean, if I think about it now, so many years later, you know, I'm so tall, and that was always constant, you know, even when people would introduce me, and it was the first thing people, I mean, still to this day, but you know, in the 80s, an MC's gonna, you know, first of all, it was always like, oh, our next act is a woman. That was usually, you know, the first thing, and then I just throw it back in their face, you know, that's our MC, he has a penis and balls, he's a man. But a lot of times they would lift the mic stand up or say something about, you know, that was a defining thing with me and my whole life. And I think that maybe might have been an attempt to, like, here's something else you can look at. And Michael Patrick King, who created, he's, you know, really created Sex and the City. He's written for them and executive produced and all that stuff. He said to me, we were I think at the Improv in New York on 44th between 8th and 9th. And he said, oh my God, that stupid Spit Girl. If you had your own show in the 60s, you'd slide down that Spit Girl singing It's Judy Show. And that was it. And I was like, oh my God, that's true. And I would sing, It's Judy Show, after every fucking joke that bombed. And it was so true. I loved variety shows, and I loved the 60s, and I love all that, like, flower power shit and all that, you know, 60s and 70s stuff. So that really became sort of my signature thing. And to this day, people will come up to me on the street and are like, It's Judy Show! You know.
Well, people remembered it. It's like with me, with Kevin, I don't care. People remember that stuff.
Oh my God, I know!
And you sit there, I watched his old Carson set, and I was dying because I was like, first of all, the balls on this guy to get on national TV, you know, on the Tonight Show, and sit there and break into and it's amazing. And I think it takes a lot of confidence on stage, like, I know all comics were insecure, but to sit there and, like, your act, it's like you were very upfront, and you didn't give a crap. And I know for me, if I didn't get a laugh, I would go, I'd sit there, go shit in my head. Right. How did you keep, was that all a guys, or were you just, like, so confident on stage because you had acting background that you just didn't give a crap?
Oh no, I did stand up since I'm 19 years old. And, you know, another thing I write about in my fantastic book, I was bullied a lot, you know, and made fun of, you know, and I'm not saying, oh, poor me. But when you're humiliated on a daily basis, there's nothing that you can say that I haven't heard that, you know, is going to hurt me. And I've been there, done that. I've heard it. And I think part of my, you know, I was always funny, but part of loving being a stand-up is that I'm controlling the laughter. You know what? I'm one step ahead. You're not going to laugh at me. I'm going to tell you what you're going to laugh at. And I think that all that ridicule and otherness sort of gave me this fuck you attitude. But in reality, if you know me as a person, you know, I'm a mush. I'm a very sensitive, like I'm just so empathetic and loyal to a fault. But when I'm on stage, I just call the shit out as I see it, you know, because I never understood, like, I just never understood, you know, you're a Jew, right?
No, I'm not actually. Everyone thinks I am.
You're not a Jew?
Everyone thinks I am. I'm not. I grew up in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And
Oh
everyone
my
thinks,
God! I went to Rutgers, and my roommate was from Cherry Hill. Oh my God, you're so Jewy. And Cooper's such a Jewy name. Anyway, in the Jewy family, there are so many secrets. There's a lot of whispering. There was a lot of like speaking in Yiddish and German, so I wouldn't hear, you know, but I'd hear my name. It'd be like, oh, Judith, and I'm like, what the fuck is everyone, you know? I never understood why no one talked about the elephant in the room. Like as a little kid, I was like, what, why aren't we talking about what everyone's thinking? You know, always. And I think that is, I'm still like that. Like, why are we not talking about what everyone's thinking? You know, which Joan Rivers, you know, when you look, Joan Rivers always said, I'm saying what everyone's thinking, but too afraid to say.
now, your book is, yes, I can say that. Is that one of the reasons why you wrote it? Because it seems like right now you can't say what you want to say. Like your act from years ago, you know, your comments about Jews and stuff like that. Even people who are Jewish would find that maybe offensive. It's funny because people find things offensive. Like I always say, I'm bald. I said, no one gives a bald guy a break. But I don't find anything offensive about bald.
Right.
I'm like, I don't find it. But is that one of the reasons why you wrote the book? Because you've always wanted to say what is on your mind?
Well, I feel like, first of all, the book came about, I was asked to write a book about free speech from the perspective of a comedian by an editor over at Day Street Books. And I really wanted to, I was like, yes, of course, didn't realize, I kind of knew it was a daunting task, but, you know, it's a daunting task. But I feel like when you don't talk about things, that's when you get into trouble. That's when they repeat themselves. And if I was going to address exactly what you're saying, you know, I'm talking about Jews, right? Because I'm a Jew and I live my life through the eyes of a Jew. Like it's, you know, people always ask me, are you more gay, more Jewish? Like it's so stupid. But I'm a Jew. Like it's in my DNA. It's what I think. It's the way I think. It's what I eat. It's how I look. It's how I talk. You know, it's me, you know? And I'm also a lesbian. And I notice what's happening is people are saying, no, you can't talk about that because we find it offensive. Okay? First of all, you're 12. And you've been on this earth for 12 fucking years, okay? So you haven't lived in the world as a person. You gain perspective, you know? Joking, for a lot of us, especially in the LGBTQ plus community, it's a coping mechanism. We went through a fucking plague, and, you know, I used terms that were acceptable 30, 40 years ago. And you're saying, no, you can't say that anymore because I blank. And it's like, well, actually, meanings of words change. People evolve. But when you take the intent out of the equation, when you say, I heard that word, and for me that word means blank, and I'm not going to listen to the entire thought. I'm not going to listen to what the person is intending to the point they're intending to make. I'm not going to listen to any nuance. I'm going to take it out of context. That's where why this shit happens. It's like, you know, I say this a lot in interviews. If you murdered someone and you were on trial for homicide, your sentence is determined by your intent. What were you thinking? Did you mean this? Did you mean that? And yet you don't give the same consideration to a comedian telling a joke and their only goal is to make you laugh. That's their only goal. So and we oftentimes miss the mark or we cross the line, but we don't know where the line is until we do our work in front of an audience. So don't fucking, cancel us and vilify us for doing our job. And the other thing is this idea that everything's about you. What the fuck? What is that shit? No one was thinking about you or your feelings when they wrote the joke. No one. Okay? It's like, take yourself out of it. Okay? What is this comedian saying? We're the truth tellers. We speak truth to power. And that is threatening to a lot of people. This country has a weird relationship with the truth. And, as you know, comedy is a weapon. I use it. Look at fat fuck Trump. I mean, he's investigating SNL. I mean, seriously? What the fuck is wrong with you? He can't go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner? Like, this is just like nonsense. Satire is such a palatable way to make a point, and deal with subversive issues. You know what I mean? Like, and when you think of America, like, there's nothing more American than stand-up comedy, because I think about our armed services who are embedded in, in wars and just, overseas and just, God bless them. But what have we done since the late 30s? We've sent comedians over to them to make them feel better. What other country sends comedians to their embedded armed forces, to make them, to ease their pain? This shit is stopping people from laughing. Steve, like, I'll do a joke. This is how it is now. You do a joke, right? And the audience will be like, oh, right. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to. Like, what the? No, your instincts are right. If I talk about something, it doesn't cheapen that horrific event. It doesn't take away the pain from that horrific event. It acknowledges it. It says it was there. I'm, like when I have jokes about the Holocaust, and I've had people say to me, I'm uncomfortable with that, and I'm like, you can be uncomfortable with that, and that's on you. But I get on stage every night and talk about the Holocaust. I get on stage every night and say I'm a Jew. I get on stage every night and say I'm a leslie. I do this. It's equal in my act. Stop taking yourself so fucking seriously. It's ridiculous.
Now, what was it
it's
like?
Fake too. Yeah.
What was it like for you not performing for a while? Because, we were on a shutdown for a long time. And, and I understand, some people did Zoom shows, which I just can't see the concept of doing a Zoom show for the fact that it's good that people can get the laugh, but do you leave their mics on? Do you turn it off?
Yeah.
But what was it like for you not being on stage? Because you've been a working comic and a performer for years. And all of a sudden, people, I'm sure the first month you're like, oh, you know what? It's going to pass. Then you're like, holy shit, it's not going to pass. And then you're like, what am I going to do? And it's like anything. I mean, when I used to do comedy, I would have to get on stage every night. It's like that runner who runs miles. If they don't get it, they get grumpy. How is it like you? How did you run this wave of the pandemic from not being on stage? And at what point did you get used to it and go, holy crap, I don't know if I'm ever going to get back on stage?
Right. Good question. I've been doing this since I'm 19. I'm 58. And every night, I mean, look, I graduated college. In the very beginning, I didn't do it all the time. But, I guess starting at about, 23, 24, it was what you're saying, like every fucking night. And, it's interesting because, I've had kids and, my entire adult life, I have, maybe had dinner and then gone out to work. And all of a sudden, it stopped. Everything stopped. And I was like, oh, this is what normal people, like, I had no idea. People eat and then they go read or watch TV or they go to the gym and I'm like, oh. And I don't think I ever would have stopped if this didn't happen. And the good thing was I got really great time with my family that I never would have had. Everyone was in the same boat. I kind of liked it. I kind of was like, oh, this is kind of great. I don't have to go on Instagram and see everyone's perfect life and every TV show they're doing and their perfect families and their new house. It really forced people to, stop and look at their lives. And I feel like people like comedians, people like actors, people like gig workers who are so used to the precariousness of not knowing where their next dollar is coming from. I think they fared better than some of these people who were doing shitty jobs for 45 years, planning on retiring, and then blah, 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 had their life planned out. I think we were more emotionally equipped for it. And the Zoom shows I did, it was interesting because I was like, but I literally, and people commented on it, I got all the equipment and set an area up like it was a comedy club. I put up a backdrop, I had a stool, I had my mic, and I had the computer, like literally I set it up, and I felt like I had just done a set. Like when I was done, I was like, oh, except I don't have to get on a fucking subway or get in a car or get in a plane. But it was so funny because, if I was doing a Jew show, and they were unmuted, it was like, oh, I have to close the window. I can't. Oh my God, she's filthy. It was just shit. And so finally, these producers were like, okay, why don't we mute everyone, which is the worst. And then they had to do this sort of screening of who they could unmute, who was, and the delay, like, when you're on stage, every audience laughs differently and you get into a rhythm. You start, you're like, okay, they laugh like this. You're always editing. You're always figuring out when to start the next joke, whether or not to do a tag, it's all happening in real time. And here you are, like, doing a joke. Oh, okay. You're waiting. And I sort of worked with it. I did a lot of crowd work. I would be like, I can't believe you're washing dishes. Look at Johnny sleeping. It was, and they were like, oh, so I figured out a way to make it work. But I have to tell you, I was lucky enough last summer, I was here doing 2 shows a week outdoors, which was great. But walking into the club finally in May at full capacity and hearing that laughter in real time was, it took away any of those notions of, I don't know if I'll understand it anymore. Because you did question it like, oh, I like not packing. I like staying home. I like baking bread. But the minute you hear that laugh in a full room laugh, there is nothing that compares to it. Nothing. I mean, I think I've changed I don't really want to go on the road anymore like I did. I don't want to be packing and, but I still go out especially when I'm in New York. I still go out 5 nights a week. I do sets and go down to the cellar, and I'm have my notebook, and I'm sitting on the subway. Sometimes I'm sitting on the subway with my notebook, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm almost 60 years old, and I still love this. I still I like walk in the club. It's like my family. I'm like, oh, I'm getting on stage. You know, it's fucking crazy. It's crazy.
Now, what got you into stand-up? I mean, you know, we all have different reasons. I mean, mine was, you know, everyone said, oh, you know, I was the quiet but made people laugh in class. I wasn't the class clown. And I always liked stand-up. And finally, my mom had found a learning annex class in Philadelphia taught by Brian McKim and Tracy Skeen. So I went and I took that. And I didn't tell me, because I don't think people can teach you how to be funny.
No, you can't.
It taught me how to create an act and where to go. I was from Cherry Hill. I didn't go into Philadelphia. We stayed in Cherry Hill. And I learned. But that's how I started. What got you into comedy? What made you decide to be a stand-up? Because it is, and back then, there wasn't a lot of female comics either.
No. I loved comedy. And I remember, I ended up becoming friends with Joan Rivers, but I remember as a little girl watching Joan and thinking, oh my God, here's this loud Jewish woman, brilliant. Oh my, like saying all the shit that I wish I could, and my parents love her. Everyone loves her. Fucking Johnny Carson, the whitest man on earth. Like, she's hysterical. And I remember Toady Fields and Sophie Tucker. I remember Moms Mabley. I remember Carol Burnett. I mean, Lucille Ball. There were all these women that I was like, oh my God, they're fucking hilarious. But when I was in college, I was a sophomore. And we had Secret Santas. And I went to Rutgers. And so... but our RA, my friend Howard, who every night for Secret Santas, we would put on a show in the lobby. Everyone would get a note from their Secret Santa, and they had to perform something or do something really weird. Like, I remember one student had to sing Let It Rain, or they played Let It Rain, and every time they got to the chorus, people dropped water on her. You know, people were walking around with apples on their heads. It was ridiculous. Anyway, I get a note from my Secret Santa saying I have to do 10 minutes of stand-up comedy and use everyone on the floor as material. And I took off from class. I wrote jokes. I took it so seriously. And we set up that night for the big show. The next night, I had 2 days to do it. And I was so fucking nervous. And I did my first joke. Everyone started laughing, and it was like an out-of-body experience. I was like, God has spoken to me. Like, I never felt like that about anything ever. And that was it. My friend Howard was my Secret Santa.
Now, how did you start breaking into New York? Because, you know, I think about it offhand, you know, I started in 88 in Philadelphia, and I think the only women we had were Mary Ellen Hooper and... I think a girl I knew, Laura Gottfried. Tracy Skeen was before us. She had already started. But I think about the open mics. Now, given it's changed. Back then, an open mic, we'd only have 25 people. It's not like now they have 2,000. But there wasn't a lot of women. How was it for you trying to break into it in New York? One, because New York was a pretty much a guys' club. There's there's guys who were doing it forever. But what was it like for you being, you know, a newbie, because you just started at college, and then sitting there trying to get the respect and get the stage time?
So I had won this contest at Rutgers. They did some sort of talent contest. And I won. And what it was called Campus Comedy. And they would have 3 professional comedians come and judge this sort of show, and whoever won got to perform with them. So I won, and I got to do 5 minutes, and the show was Larry Ambrose was hosting, Adrian Tolsch was headlining, and Bill Sheft was the feature. Bill Sheft was the head writer for Letterman. Ambrose has written for he was Joan Rivers' writer. He writes for Barry Manilow or whatever. And Adrian Tolsch was the queen of New York comedy. She ran the open mic nights at Catch a Rising Star, which was the hottest club in the 80s and early 90s. There's nothing has ever compared to that period of time because, you know, we didn't have cell phones. I mean, it was, you got discovered. And I did my 5 minutes and they were like, "You're really funny." And I was like, "Really?" And Adrian said, "I run the open mics on Mondays. Come in and hang out and I'll get you on." So of course I'm like this 19-year-old, like, "Oh, okay." And then I started hanging out at Catch a Rising Star thinking I was going to get on. But, you know, I would go and hang and I wouldn't get on. But I would watch. I'd stay there all night and watch. And the women who I found, you know, yes, there were not a lot of women. And at that time, you never had more than one woman on a show. They would never have a woman follow another woman. When I started going out on the road and trying to get other gigs, I would call clubs and they would say, "Oh, we had a woman here 3 months ago. She didn't do well, so we're not hiring." And I'd be like, "Oh, so every guy that's been on your stage has killed? Is that what you're fucking saying?" But when I started, I watched Susie Essman, Joy Behar, Carol Leifer, Kathy Ladman, Paula Poundstone, Margaret Smith. She was amazing. And I had watched in high school Elaine Boozler and Rita Rudner. But, you know, sort of in my class, which the difference between being a female comic at the time and being a male comic was we never got to work with each other, ever. And there was a club in Soho called Comedy U Grand. It was on 55 Grand Street. And every Thursday, they did a show that was all women. And it was so, they literally, I have an ad, I saved it, where it says, Thursdays, all female comedians. Like they had to double fucking down on it, you know? And that, we all got $5. And that was the only night of the week we all got to work together. And that's where I met Wanda. Susie and Joy would come in a lot. Henriette Mantel. Who else did we hang out with? Brett Butler. God, who else was there? Shit. I mean, a lot of people who don't even do stand-up anymore. You know, it's funny that you talk about, you know, now there's so many more women. We still don't get paid as much. And it's interesting. We've gotten to say more of what we want to say on stage. But there's still these shows like where there's 3 guys on a show, it's a comedy show. When there's 3 women on a show, it's a special event. It's Hysterical or Ladies Night Out or for women only, you know. And I remember I got an HBO special in 95. And at that time, they were doing these specials where it was 5 women doing about 12 to 15 minutes each. And they called it Women of the Night. And those were the only, I mean, besides Caroline's Comedy Hour and Evening at the Improv, those were really the only opportunities we had. And I had gotten Women of the Night, and then they gave me an HBO special, thank God, a half hour. But, you know, it was, I look now, and, I look at a lot of, there's so many, and there's some of them they're just great. I mean, I love women comics. But it's so funny because the women before me and the women who paved the way for me, and then me, who I came out in 96 on stage as a gay parent. And I was also pregnant on stage. And it's just funny now that, oh, this one's pregnant. And, and I'm like, I was pregnant on stage in 2001, but no one paid attention. It's as if like, oh, look what these people are doing, you know? And it's like, no, we were all kind of doing that. But no one was paying attention. And I love that it's easier for them, but it's still not as fair. And there's still a double standard. And it's like this idea of feminism, which to me is that whatever women say on stage is just as valid, just as funny, just as equal as whatever guys talking about. It doesn't mean we should talk about the same things as guys. We should use their language or, you know, talk about porn, and which is fine. Like, you do whatever you want. But it should also be that whatever the fuck we're talking about is just as valid as whatever any guy is talking about. But now, I'm 58, the ageism is ridiculous. It is beyond ridiculous. And I talk about it with some of my guy comic friends too, but for a woman, it's really funny how we get older, we get funnier. And a lot of the networks are like, no one wants to hear what you have to say. Oh, really? Well, Joan Rivers was never more relevant than when she died at 82, you know?
It's funny. It's so, I say that to people I know about, you know, sitcoms. You know, a lot of sitcom writers were getting, you know, they didn't want the older people. They wanted the young people. Then they brought all the young people in, and all the shows sucked. So they said, we have to go back and get the people who actually know what they're doing. Because, you know, I've always noticed, and even podcasting, I've been doing this for 10 years. And there's people who have been doing it for like a year and a half or two. And I try to tell them, no, man, it's an art form. You know, you got to sit there. You don't learn it. And I always tell them, if you're a performer, it's a little bit easier because you know the thing. Like a comic, we can think on our feet. Of a guest, you know, we get guests who can be pricks sometimes, but if you sit there, you know how to deal with it. But it's just funny that, you know, you're right. I mean, and for you, you've been working for a long time, and your writing style has changed. Your humor has changed. You've grown more, and you think people would want that because it's like anything. Unless you get worse. If you get worse doing comedy for a long time, just get out of the business.
Well, you know, I feel like, you know the people who get worse, and also I should mention the fact that my neighbor's doing construction. I'm going to close the window. Hold on. He has to fucking saw. God damn it. Anyway, the people who've given me jobs in this business, have all been women. Margaret Cho, Rosie O'Donnell, Pamela Adlon, Bette Midler, and they've all given me like great opportunities. But it's funny when you say people aren't funny anymore. And you know what I think happens? When you start believing all the shit, you know, when you become famous and don't, you know, live in the same reality as everyone else. You know, like Andy Kaufman purposely would go drive a cab for 3 months to be in the world, you know? You gotta be in the world. You know, this is your perspective. And I think when people get too big for their bridges, or I don't know, I really think you have to be. There's a certain sense of humility and just groundedness that you need to have to remain funny. You know. You know, we all have our point of view, but if your point of view changes to the point where your point of view is not relatable anymore to other people, that's when I think you become unfunny, you know?
Now, how has your point of view changed? How has your act developed over the years as you've matured? It happens in comedy, it happens in songwriting, it happens with everyone. How would you say you look at it? And how do you think you've grown?
Well, I think... you know, I'm older. I'm a mother. my parents are dead. I think that there are all these things that happen in your life that sort of change you and change. Like if I were to think back, the things, you know, when I was doing stand-up in my 20s, my father died when I was 27, suddenly. And I remember, you know, there's certain times in your life, there's a before Judy and an after Judy where you're permanently changed. And I remember my father died, and I remember after that, you know, I do a lot of crowd work when I'm doing a long show. I love doing crowd work, which I was told not to do for many years. Like, that's the other thing, you know, for many years, you're too Jewish. Don't talk about this. Don't talk about being gay. Don't do crowd work. Like, all that shit that I kept in the back of my mind, that's how I've changed. I'm like, don't you fucking ever tell me what to do. Ever. It's my, you know, and Adrienne Tolsch said that to me once. She said, it's your time on stage and you do with it what you want. Not, you know, but you got to turn that shit off. You can't compare yourself to another comic because you're all different. You know, there's room for everyone. But, you know, I remember my father died, and afterwards I was doing a show and there was this family in the front row, and I was like, hey, what are you guys celebrating? What's going on? And they were like, our mother died last week. We're trying to all come out and laugh. And usually before that I've been like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. But then I was like, well, great. Thank you so much for bringing the show down. Everything's about you. You know, like it. And they started laughing. I remember I was once doing a show at the Original Room, and there were these 3 or 4 chatty people in the car. I go, what the hell's going on over there? You're not shutting up. They're like, she has cancer and she's getting her leg amputated tomorrow. And I'm like, oh, everything's about you, isn't it? Everything's about, and I would do a joke and I'd be like, but I don't have cancer. And they fucking loved it, you know? And that's where I sort of learned, like, stop, you know, nothing is sacred. Nothing is too, you know, laughter is such a salve. You know, my friend Bob Smith, who was my closest friend, and he was a comic, and he died of ALS. He was the first out gay male on The Tonight Show. He written 5 books. He was just the greatest. And I write about this in my book too, and he wrote it about it in one of his books, Treehab. His sister shot herself, and this is the way if you really want to know what how comics relate to one another, for the listeners, I'm just telling you this because this is how we talk to each other. His sister shot herself, and he had to go and identify the body and then call his mother and tell. I mean, it was awful. She lived in California. And he called me, and I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And then the following day, I called him up and I said, how are you doing? And he was like, you know, crying. And I said, you know what, Bob? Seriously. It's been 24 hours. Don't you think you're overreacting? And he said, that was like putting a candle in a coffin for him, that he saw the light. You know, we are comics because it's been our coping mechanism, you know? It doesn't mean he's not in the same amount of pain and that I'm, you know, cheapening or denying his pain. It just means, like, it's a release. Like, think about if you go to a funeral and someone gets up to talk and it's like, oh, and then finally they say, and then remember when he used to run around with that hat on? They don't. It's like a release. It's like a release of tension. That's what a punchline is, you know? And it's not your enemy. So stop, you know?
It is crazy you say that, and you're right. And you see that a lot on Twitter. People get so pissed. And I know you're very good with the trolls on Twitter. I've seen you respond. But now, I mean, as someone, because, you know, you're well known, and you're a comic, and some people that gives them fodder to jump on your case. Do you sit there and just, is there any times you just say, fuck it, I'm not even going to deal with this? Or do you just say, you know what, screw this person? How do you deal with that? Because even if you just write something, you know, I think you wrote something and someone said, oh, you're still alive. And
right, that happened recently.
Yeah, I saw that, and I was like, but I think,
then,
how do you decipher who you're going to fuck with and who you aren't?
It's like, it kind of depends on what kind of day I'm having, because mostly I'm like, oh, go fuck yourself. But I was just like, you know, sometimes I'll say why. Like, what is it? Like, and for that one, someone was like, oh, the shock to me was that Judy Gold's still alive. And I wrote something about, okay, 20 followers, meaning, you know, I don't have that many followers, maybe, you know, 57,000 or something. I don't even know. But my point being, obviously people know I'm alive, you know? And yet everyone takes it a different way. Like, oh, you're making fun of him because he has 20. No, I'm acknowledging that I'm alive because I actually, you know, you have 20 followers. You would be, you know, but whatever, it doesn't matter. So that one I did the other day because I was really pissed off. But, you know, I've gotten, if I can think of a joke, I mean, sometimes they're so mean that they're hilarious. Like someone wrote, you know, they should have another Holocaust just for you. And I was like, really? You know, why kill all those other people? You know, if you just, you think about that these people have no fucking balls, that they're anonymous. It's like, oh, you're so powerful. You wrote something mean to someone. And, you know, like they're just, it's pathetic.
Well, I always compare it to, you know, back before social media, if you were out at a bar with your friends and their friend brought that one asshole who would sit there and if he called you stupid, you'd punch him in the face. I mean, it wasn't, but now they don't have to worry about that. And when you're a comic and you're opinionated, it seems it pulls these leeches out just to try to attack.
You know, that's another thing that changed. You know, I used to just be like, you know, I'll say what I say, and, you know, I'm not going to get involved in politics. But then you just are like, really? You know, I have a microphone, and, you know, it really started when I came out, and I was like, people would come up to me after the show, when I was talking about my family, and be like, you know, after a few minutes, they forgot I was gay, because it was the same shit they're dealing with their kids. And it really did change their minds. I had a guy in Houston come up to me and say, I really understand why, you know, I was in the armed forces. I get why gays want to get married now, or why you should be able to get married. I used to do a whole bit about all the people that are allowed to get married and I'm not. Like, you know, Eric and Lyle Menendez can get married in jail, but I can't, you know? And it was just, you know, just the irony and you know, there were certain things I just wanted to talk about on stage, and I was just like, I'm not going to fucking please everyone. But now the social media shit is so annoying in a way. And I know a lot of people like it because, I mean, I resent it in a way because I feel like I have to spend time doing that instead of what I want to do, you know? But it's really hard business-wise because someone who does the viral video and then, you know, gets 1 million followers will be booked in a club before someone who's been doing it for 35 years and has an act. And that person will go in and bomb, and people will be like, oh, you know, they're not ready to do that. And yet the club will book them to do that. And those people will leave thinking that's what comedy is. So it's a necessary evil. And when we were talking in the beginning and I said, it was like, you get on stage, you didn't know who was in the audience. People would get the Tonight Show or Letterman or a sitcom deal just from someone stopping in and, you know, just being there. It was a really exciting, when you auditioned for SNL, you did it, it didn't matter. You had your, 6 minutes, whatever, you got on. The audience sucked. Too bad. That was it. you had one shot. You didn't get to tape it and tape it again and then tape it again and tape it again and tape it again until you finally got the tape you wanted and sent it over to the casting director. Just it's a whole different ballgame now. And you think about entertainment, you know, when I think about like consummate entertainers, like Sammy Davis Jr. was a consummate, like it was him and a stage, and he could do anything, you know. There was no like pyrotechnics. There was no, you know, that kind of stuff is what I miss, you know, the pure entertainment.
I got to ask you, you know, you mentioned earlier when you decided to come out on stage and said things. What was that like? Was it a breath of fresh air? Because for years you probably wanted to do bits about it, but because it was such a different climate. I mean, it's funny. I think about my buddy Gene I went to college with, and I graduated college in '86. And you know, I was back then. I look now because we're friends, and he's married to his husband. They've been together, and I always think, you know, back then we go, "Hey man, you're not hitting on any girls." He's like, "No." Back then, no one was allowed. I mean, it was like, "Oh, wait a second, you can't." What was it like for you on stage when you sat there and you probably just say, "Man, this bit is a gem, but I can't do it because one, bookers will be like, oh well, we don't want that in the car."
Yeah.
What was it like for you? What made you finally decide I'm coming out on stage?
Okay, well, I did watch all the people like Bob, Suzanne Westenhofer, Robin Tyler. Oh my God, there were so many before me who were fearless. Reno, who else? Frank Maya, all these people. A lot of them worked in cabaret or smaller performing art spaces, and they were pigeonholed. We're told that, you know, this is a gay comedian, lesbian comedian, and I never wanted to be that. I just wanted to be a funny comedian. And I did talk about gay people in my act, but I never, like my roommates, you know, I would talk about all this stuff. But once I had a child and I had all this material, and I was like, first of all, what kind of message is that to give to your kid? Listen, I'm not going to talk about our family on stage because, you know, I was like, fuck it. My family's just as valid as yours. Everyone talks about their family. I'm going to talk about my family. It really came out as a gay parent, you know? And I was proud of my family. And I was like, fuck it. I'm not going to lie about who I am. Before that, I didn't really have any material. I was in a relationship. It was, you know, a boring, you know, I didn't really focus on that at all. But once I had kids, that was it. And I wanted them to be proud as I am of our family. And, you know, that's my truth. I mean, there's people still in the closet, and I'm like, really? Because you can't. It's hard to be a great comedian if you're bullshitting all the time.
Now, I got another question for you. The podcast. What
Yes.
decided to make through the podcast? I know you had the wonderful Wendy Liebman on just recently.
Oh, yes, just recently.
She's
Yeah.
doing my show tomorrow for like the 4th or 5th time. She's the nicest person. What made you decide to do a podcast, and how do you go about getting your guests? Who do you choose?
Well, first I was asked, CBS started a podcast network, which is now defunct, and they asked me to do it. And I was like, okay, well, everyone has a podcast. This was in 2015. What's going to make mine different? And I wanted to think about what's different about me. And the fact is, I get annoyed at everything. I am my mother's daughter, and everything fucking gets on my nerves. And I say kill me now about 100,000 times a day, which according to the Brandeis new terms you're not allowed to say, Brandeis University, one of them is kill me or I'm going to kill myself. So basically I can't even talk anymore. So I said, why don't I get my guests on and we'll talk about what pisses them off the most? Because I wanted something that makes them passionate, you know? So that's how it sort of started. And then it sort of morphed, as you said, you grow into it. I love people's stories. I love their childhoods. I love to know, like, I'm always like doing research on people and finding out like interesting things about it. I was like, that's what I want. That's what I want to do. I want to find out who the fuck you are and what your story is. and shit about you that you don't talk about, that no one, because you're always promoting something. And that's what it became. It became that plus what pisses you off the most. And I do these in-depth interviews where, I'm not kidding, 99.9% of the time, at least 2 or 3 times during the interview, people are like, "What? How do you know that?" And it sort of morphed out of the amount I've done interviews and been asked the most ridiculous questions. No one's done their due diligence. They haven't, they don't know the name of my book, or they don't, it's like, really, it's so fucking easy to do your job. Don't make me do your job. And so I find people's fascinating. I find people's stories fascinating. And there's always something you don't know, like that. You're like, wow. And that's really what the podcast is about. And I found out from someone I know who's a producer on a talk show that they use my podcast as research.
Well, there you go. That's good. I always like to do my research, but I've learned you can never, and I learned this very early on, you can't trust Wikipedia. Because I
do other shit. I just read. Yeah, I read articles.
I had Mindy Sterling on my show, and I said, "Oh, so Mindy, you were in BJ and the Bear?" No, I wasn't. And then as an interviewer, you're like, "Oh shit, I screwed up."
Right.
But,
yeah, I always read interviews they've done, or listen to. I read their books, or I listen to like the NPR, stuff. That's where you really get stuff. Even it's funny, I've learned about people through the forwards in their book. People really, I think when they do these things, they want to feel comfortable or feel, respected in a way, like, oh, you're really interested in this is not just a bullshit thing, and that's why I do it. I feel like it's the interview that people should, do, but they don't, because no one has a fucking work ethic anymore.
And that pisses you off.
Oh my God, I can't. Just do your fucking job, or don't take the job. You know what I mean?
I always think that too. I always laugh. When I was growing up, I worked at a restaurant. If I was like 2 minutes late, even if it was snowing, I'd be yelled at. Next day, if I did the same thing, I'd be fired. Now it's like you can be late 27 times, and even with comedy, I was never late for a show.
Never.
If I was a half an hour before, and if I was going to be like 20 minutes before, I'd be shitting myself, going, "Oh my God, there's traffic. I'm not going to make it."
Right. It's just, it's so weird. It's like, you're late. I'm sorry. That triggers me. And it's like, oh, fucking shut up. Shut the fuck up. It's like everyone thinks that their opinion is valid. It's like we've gotten to the point where, you get a trophy for winning the race and breaking the record, and you get a trophy for smiling while he did it. No! It's not the same thing, and that's not how life is. Ugh.
I want to thank you. This was great. I've liked your act. I've been, it's funny.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You always crack me up, and my wife's a fan too. And I was watching the old clips today. So that's the one great thing about with YouTube, you can find clips from years ago. Like you see some people, and you're like, oh my God, it's crazy. So you have a great website. People go to judygold.com. Her website, it shows everything. It shows her book. It shows her podcast. What shows do you want to promote besides your?
Well, I'm in Provincetown. I want to promote my podcast, and of course, please, if you love stand-up, you'll love my book. Yes, I can say that. When they come for the comedians, we're all in trouble. It's also an audio book, which people love. And I am August 1st. I'll be in Atlanta. Then I'm going to Minnesota. I don't even know. Go look at my thing. I can't even deal with it.
So people check out Judy's website.
My thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Go to my website, coopertalk.net. Yeah. You can find over 860
and follow
episodes.
Me.
Follow her on Twitter.
Follow me on Twitter, JEWDY.
Judy Gold.
Twitter and Instagram.
And she tweets a lot, and she's very funny. And,
thank you.
People, so follow me on Twitter, @CooperTalk. Instagram, CooperTalk1. Remember, I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guests. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Thank you.